My name is Sarah Chen, and I never imagined that caring for an elderly woman would change my entire life. For 3 years, I was nothing more than invisible help to the wealthy Blackwood family. I cleaned their mansion, prepared their meals, and tended to their matriarch with genuine compassion while they treated me like I didn't exist. Then came the day of the will reading that left everyone speechless, including me. It all started when I was 26 and desperately needed work. I had been bouncing between temporary jobs since graduating from nursing school, struggling to pay off student loans while caring for my aging mother. The employment agency called about a live-in caretaker position for Eleanor Blackwood, the 82-year-old widow of real estate mogul Harrison Blackwood. The Blackwood estate sat on 15 acres in the most exclusive part of the city, surrounded by towering oak trees and manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. The mansion itself was a testament to old money, with its stone facade, sprawling wings, and windows that seemed to watch visitors with centuries of accumulated wisdom. I remember driving up the circular driveway in my decade-old Honda, feeling completely out of place among the luxury cars parked near the main entrance. A stern-looking woman in her 50s answered the door when I knocked. She introduced herself as Margaret Hartwell, the head housekeeper, and her expression made it clear that she had already decided I wasn't suitable for the position. Margaret led me through rooms filled with priceless antiques, oil paintings that belonged in museums, and furniture that looked like it had been crafted by master artisans centuries ago. The silence in the house was almost oppressive, broken only by the ticking of ornate clocks and the distant sound of my footsteps echoing on marble floors. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood was waiting for me in what Margaret called the morning room, a sun-filled space overlooking the gardens. She sat in a wheelchair near the window, a small woman with silver hair and the most penetrating blue eyes I had ever seen. Despite her advanced age and obvious frailness, there was an intelligence and dignity about her that commanded immediate respect. Eleanor studied me for several long moments before speaking. Her voice was soft but carried the authority of someone who had spent decades making important decisions. She asked about my nursing background, my experience with elderly care, and my reasons for wanting the position. Her questions were direct but not unkind, and I found myself being completely honest about my financial struggles and my mother's health issues. What surprised me was that Eleanor seemed more interested in my character than my qualifications. She asked about my hobbies, my family, and what I hoped to accomplish in life. When I mentioned that I enjoyed reading and had always dreamed of traveling to see historical sites around the world, her eyes lit up with genuine interest. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours, during which Margaret served tea in delicate china cups and occasionally interjected with practical questions about schedules and duties. I learned that Eleanor required assistance with daily activities, medication management, and companionship. The position included room and board in a small apartment above the garage, along with a salary that was more generous than I had expected. Eleanor offered me the job at the end of our conversation, much to Margaret's obvious surprise. She explained that I would be working closely with the family and that discretion and professionalism were essential. I accepted immediately, grateful for the opportunity and intrigued by this remarkable woman who had chosen to trust me with her care. My first week at the Blackwood estate was an education in family dynamics and social hierarchies that I had never experienced before. Eleanor's 3 adult children visited regularly, but their interactions with their mother were formal and brief, more like business meetings than family gatherings. James Blackwood, the eldest son at 58, had inherited his father's business acumen but none of his warmth. He was a tall, imposing man who spoke in clipped sentences and seemed perpetually annoyed by any conversation that didn't involve profit margins or market projections. His visits to see Eleanor were dutiful rather than affectionate, and he often spent more time on his phone conducting business than engaging with his mother. Patricia Blackwood Sterling, Eleanor's daughter, was 4 to 5 and had married into another wealthy family, combining 2 fortunes into an even larger one. She was perfectly polished in every way, from her designer clothes to her professionally styled hair, but there was a coldness about her that made me uncomfortable. Patricia's visits were social performances where she discussed charity events and society parties while barely acknowledging her mother's responses. The youngest son, David, was 42 and had spent his life living off the family fortune without contributing anything meaningful to it. He was charming in a superficial way but had a drinking problem that he thought he hid better than he actually did. David's visits were usually requests for money disguised as filial concern, and I could see the disappointment in Eleanor's eyes every time he left. None of Eleanor's children seemed to notice or care that their mother was slowly declining both physically and emotionally. They were so focused on their own lives and interests that they missed the subtle signs of her growing frailness and increasing isolation. That's where I came in, and it quickly became clear that Eleanor needed far more than just medical care. My daily routine with Eleanor began each morning at 7 when I would help her with her medications and morning routine. She was proud and independent, preferring to do as much as possible for herself, but she appreciated having someone nearby who understood her needs without being asked. We would have breakfast together in the morning room, where she would read the newspaper and share observations about current events that revealed her sharp intellect and broad knowledge. Eleanor was one of the most well-read people I had ever met. Her personal library contained thousands of books on subjects ranging from history and philosophy to science and literature. She had traveled extensively in her younger years and could speak knowledgeably about cultures and places I had only dreamed of visiting. Our conversations during meals and afternoon tea became the highlight of my days. What struck me most about Eleanor was her loneliness. Despite being surrounded by luxury and having access to anything money could buy, she was profoundly isolated. Her children's visits were infrequent and superficial, her old friends had either died or moved away, and the household staff, while competent, maintained professional distance that left little room for genuine human connection. I made it my mission to provide Eleanor with the companionship she craved while maintaining the professional boundaries appropriate to my position. We would spend hours discussing books, sharing stories about our different backgrounds, and planning imaginary trips to places she remembered fondly from her travels. Eleanor's mind was still sharp, and she seemed to bloom when given the opportunity to engage in meaningful conversation. The other household staff initially treated me with suspicion and barely concealed resentment. Margaret, the head housekeeper, had been with the family for over 20 years and clearly felt that Eleanor's decision to hire me was an indictment of her own abilities. The cook, Mrs. Patterson, was pleasant enough but made it clear that I was temporary help who shouldn't expect to be included in the household's established routines. The gardening staff and part-time cleaners barely acknowledged my existence, probably assuming that I would be gone within a few months like the previous caretakers. Margaret made sure to inform me that Eleanor had gone through 7 caretakers in the 2 years before I arrived, each one leaving due to the demanding nature of the position or conflicts with the family. What they didn't understand was that I genuinely enjoyed caring for Eleanor and found our growing friendship to be personally rewarding. Unlike my previous positions where I felt like just another employee, Eleanor treated me with respect and kindness that made me want to exceed her expectations. She was interested in my life, remembered details about my family, and seemed to value my opinions on everything from current events to household matters. Eleanor's health was generally stable, but she had good days and bad days that required careful monitoring and adjustment of her care routine. On her difficult days, she would be tired and withdrawn, needing extra assistance with basic activities and gentle encouragement to eat and take her medications. On her better days, she would be alert and engaged, eager to discuss the books she was reading or to hear about my experiences growing up in a working-class family. One of the most touching aspects of our relationship was Eleanor's genuine interest in my background and dreams. She would ask about my mother's health, my student loan payments, and my hopes for the future with the kind of caring attention that I hadn't experienced since my father died when I was 15. Eleanor remembered every detail I shared and would follow up on previous conversations in ways that made me feel truly seen and valued. The Blackwood children's attitude toward me ranged from complete indifference to barely concealed hostility. James treated me like a piece of furniture, looking through me when he spoke to his mother and never acknowledging my presence unless he needed something. Patricia was more actively dismissive, making comments about the hired help and questioning Eleanor's judgment in trusting important decisions to someone with my limited experience. David was the most unpredictable in his interactions with me. When he was sober, he could be charming and almost friendly, asking about my background and making jokes about the stuffy atmosphere in the house. When he had been drinking, however, he became crude and inappropriate, making comments about my appearance and suggesting that I was taking advantage of his vulnerable mother. Eleanor seemed aware of her children's attitudes toward me but never addressed them directly in my presence. However, I noticed that she would become more formal and distant with them after they had been particularly rude, and she began scheduling their visits for times when I would be busy with other duties. It was clear that their treatment of me reflected their general lack of consideration for anyone they considered beneath their social status. My relationship with Eleanor deepened over the months as we spent countless hours together, and she began to confide in me about her disappointments and regrets. She spoke sadly about how her children had grown into adults she barely recognized, focused on money and status rather than the values she and her husband had tried to instill in them. She worried about what would happen to the family legacy and whether her grandchildren would grow up with any sense of responsibility or compassion. Eleanor also shared stories about her marriage to Harrison and their early years building the family business together. She had been more than just a wealthy man's wife. She had been his partner in creating a real estate empire that provided quality housing for thousands of families. After Harrison's death 5 years earlier, Eleanor had felt increasingly disconnected from the business that had been such an important part of her identity. The family fortune was substantial, built over decades through shrewd investments and careful management. Eleanor explained that Harrison had always intended to leave the bulk of their wealth to charity, with provisions for their children that would maintain their comfortable lifestyles without encouraging continued dependence. However, the children assumed they would inherit everything and had structured their lives around that expectation. Eleanor's health began to decline more noticeably during my second year as her caretaker. She developed a respiratory condition that left her frequently tired and short of breath, requiring more intensive medical management and closer monitoring. Her doctor recommended increasing her care from part-time assistance to full-time supervision, which meant that I was now living in the main house rather than the garage apartment. The increased intimacy of caring for Eleanor during her illness revealed even more clearly how isolated she had become from her own family. Her children visited less frequently, claiming that seeing their mother's decline was too painful, but I suspected they were simply uncomfortable with the reality of aging and mortality. Eleanor never complained about their absence, but I could see the hurt in her eyes when they failed to call or visit for weeks at a time. During this period, Eleanor began to speak more openly about her plans for the future and her concerns about what would happen after she was gone. She worried about the household staff who had served the family faithfully for years, the charities that depended on her support, and the legacy that she and Harrison had worked so hard to build. She also expressed concerns about whether her children were capable of managing the responsibility that would come with inheriting substantial wealth. One afternoon while we were having tea in the garden, Eleanor asked me about my long-term goals and whether I planned to continue working as a caretaker indefinitely. I explained that while I enjoyed my work with her, I had always hoped to eventually open my own small healthcare consulting business to help elderly people navigate the complex medical and social services they needed. I mentioned that I had been saving money toward that goal but that my mother's ongoing medical expenses made it difficult to accumulate the necessary capital. Eleanor listened thoughtfully to my explanation and then began asking detailed questions about my business plan and the services I hoped to provide. Her questions revealed a sharp understanding of business principles and market analysis that impressed me with their sophistication. She seemed genuinely interested in the potential for such a business to serve people who couldn't afford comprehensive private care but needed more support than traditional healthcare systems provided. Our conversation about my business aspirations led to a broader discussion about social responsibility and the obligations that come with privilege. Eleanor expressed frustration that her children seemed to view their wealth as an entitlement rather than a responsibility, and she worried about the example they were setting for their own children. She believed strongly that those who had been blessed with advantages had a duty to use those advantages to help others who were less fortunate. As Eleanor's condition continued to deteriorate slowly over several months, I found myself becoming not just her caretaker but also her closest confidant and companion. She began sharing family stories and memories that she had apparently never told her children, including details about business decisions, family conflicts, and personal struggles that revealed the complex history behind the Blackwood fortune. Eleanor also began asking me to help her with personal business matters that had previously been handled by her attorney and financial advisors. She wanted to review her charitable commitments, update certain legal documents, and ensure that her final wishes would be clearly understood and properly executed. I felt honored by her trust but also somewhat overwhelmed by the responsibility she was placing in me. The most surprising revelation came when Eleanor confided that she had been quietly researching my background and character through private investigators and personal references. She explained that after being disappointed so many times by people who claimed to care about her but were actually motivated by self-interest, she needed to be certain about the people she trusted with important matters. Eleanor's investigation had confirmed what she had observed firsthand, that I was honest, reliable, and genuinely caring in my approach to her welfare. She had learned about my financial struggles, my dedication to my mother's care, and my reputation among previous employers and colleagues. She seemed satisfied that her trust in me was well-founded and began to treat me more like a trusted family member than an employee. During my third year with Eleanor, her children's visits became even less frequent as they apparently grew more uncomfortable with her increasing frailness and medical needs. James was dealing with business challenges that required his constant attention, Patricia was busy with her social obligations and charity work, and David was struggling with personal problems that he tried to solve by asking his mother for increasingly large sums of money. Eleanor's disappointment with her children's neglect was becoming more obvious, though she tried to hide it from me. She would spend hours looking through photo albums of family vacations and celebrations from years past, when her relationship with her children had been closer and more affectionate. She would comment sadly about how different they had been as young people and wonder where she and Harrison had gone wrong in raising them. The contrast between her children's indifference and my daily presence and caring attention was stark. Eleanor began to rely on me not just for physical care but also for emotional support and intellectual companionship. Our conversations ranged from current events and literature to personal philosophy and family values, and Eleanor often remarked that she felt more understood by me than by her own children. One evening while I was helping Eleanor prepare for bed, she mentioned that she had been meeting regularly with her attorney to update her will and estate planning documents. She explained that she wanted to ensure her final wishes were clearly documented and legally sound, particularly regarding her charitable commitments and provisions for longtime employees. She also mentioned that she had made some decisions that would probably surprise her family but that she felt were appropriate given the circumstances. Eleanor asked me to serve as a witness for some of her legal documents, explaining that she valued my discretion and trustworthiness. I agreed, though I felt somewhat uncomfortable being involved in family financial matters. Eleanor assured me that my role was simply to confirm her mental competency and willingness to sign the documents, and that I wouldn't be privy to the specific details of her bequests. The document signing took place in Eleanor's private study with her longtime attorney, Mr. Richardson, a distinguished man in his 70s who had handled the family's legal affairs for decades. Eleanor appeared alert and decisive as she reviewed and signed multiple documents, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her clear understanding of their implications. Mr. Richardson seemed satisfied with her mental capacity and the validity of her decisions. After the legal formalities were completed, Eleanor asked to speak with me privately. She thanked me for my 3 years of dedicated service and explained that she had made provisions in her will to ensure that I would be financially secure regardless of what happened to her or changes in the family's circumstances. She wouldn't give me specific details but assured me that my loyalty and compassion had not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. Eleanor's health took a significant turn for the worse in early December of my third year with the family. She developed pneumonia that required hospitalization, and for several days her condition was critical. I stayed with her around the clock at the hospital, sleeping in a chair beside her bed and coordinating with the medical staff to ensure she received the best possible care. The Blackwood children finally appeared at the hospital when it became clear that Eleanor might not recover from this illness. James arrived first, spending most of his time on phone calls with business associates and attorneys rather than at his mother's bedside. Patricia made brief appearances between her social commitments, bringing flowers and making sure she was seen visiting but not staying long enough for meaningful interaction. David showed up sporadically, usually asking whether there had been any changes in Eleanor's condition but seeming more concerned about the potential impact on his inheritance than his mother's well-being. Eleanor rallied somewhat after a week in intensive care and was moved to a private room where she could receive visitors more comfortably. However, it was clear that the pneumonia had significantly weakened her already fragile health, and her recovery would be slow and uncertain. The doctors recommended continued hospitalization followed by an extended period of bed rest and intensive care at home. During Eleanor's hospitalization, I witnessed firsthand how differently the family members related to crisis and potential loss. James approached his mother's illness like a business problem to be managed, focusing on medical logistics and financial implications rather than emotional support. Patricia seemed primarily concerned with how Eleanor's condition would affect the family's social obligations and public image. David's visits were brief and uncomfortable, as if he couldn't bear to face the reality of his mother's mortality. In contrast, I found myself genuinely devastated by the possibility of losing Eleanor. Over 3 years, she had become much more than an employer. She had become a mentor, friend, and almost a substitute grandmother. The thought of life without our daily conversations, shared meals, and quiet moments reading together was almost unbearable. I realized that caring for Eleanor had given my life a sense of purpose and meaning that I had never experienced before. Eleanor returned home from the hospital just before Christmas, considerably weakened but determined to spend the holidays in familiar surroundings. Her children made perfunctory visits during the holiday season, bringing expensive gifts and staying just long enough to fulfill their family obligations. Their interactions with Eleanor were stilted and superficial, focusing on safe topics like the weather and current events rather than anything emotionally meaningful. I arranged for Eleanor's room to be decorated modestly for Christmas, knowing that she enjoyed the holiday traditions even if her family seemed more interested in their own celebrations. We spent Christmas Eve together quietly, with Eleanor sharing memories of past holidays when her children were young and the house was filled with laughter and excitement. She seemed sad but not bitter about the changes in her family relationships, accepting them as an inevitable part of aging and the natural drift that sometimes occurs between generations. Eleanor's condition remained stable but fragile throughout the winter months. She spent most of her time in bed or in a wheelchair, requiring assistance with most daily activities but remaining mentally sharp and engaged. Our conversations became even more precious to both of us, as we both understood that our time together was limited and uncertain. During this period, Eleanor began to speak more explicitly about her disappointment with her children's attitudes toward money, responsibility, and family obligations. She explained that she and Harrison had tried to raise their children to understand that privilege came with responsibility, but that somewhere along the way their children had developed a sense of entitlement that troubled her deeply. Eleanor also shared her concerns about what would happen to the family foundation and charitable commitments after her death. She worried that her children would abandon the philanthropic work that had been so important to her and Harrison, choosing instead to focus on their own comfort and social status. She mentioned that she had tried to structure her estate planning to encourage continued charitable giving, but she wasn't confident that her children would honor her wishes. One afternoon in early March, Eleanor asked me to sit with her in the garden room where she could watch the early spring flowers beginning to bloom. She seemed more reflective than usual, speaking about the cyclical nature of life and the importance of leaving a positive legacy for future generations. She mentioned that she had made some decisions about her estate that would ensure her values and priorities would be honored even after she was gone. Eleanor also talked about how much my companionship had meant to her during her final years and how grateful she was that fate had brought me into her life when she needed it most. She said that caring for someone was a sacred trust that revealed the true character of a person, and that I had proven myself to be someone worthy of that trust. Her words touched me deeply and made me feel that the past 3 years had been meaningful for both of us. As spring progressed, Eleanor's energy levels fluctuated dramatically from day to day. Some days she would be alert and talkative, eager to discuss current events or share memories from her past. Other days she would be tired and withdrawn, content to listen to music or audiobooks while I sat nearby doing quiet tasks. I adapted my care routine to accommodate her changing needs while trying to maintain the companionship and intellectual stimulation that she valued so highly. Eleanor's children continued their pattern of infrequent, dutiful visits throughout the spring. James would arrive with briefcases full of business documents, hoping to get his mother's signature on various matters related to the family company. Patricia would bring gossip from her social circle and updates about charity events that Eleanor could no longer attend. David's visits were increasingly focused on financial requests disguised as family emergencies or investment opportunities. Eleanor's responses to her children's visits became more subdued over time, as if she was slowly withdrawing from relationships that had never provided the emotional connection she had hoped for. She remained polite and appropriate in her interactions with them, but the spark of engagement that I saw in our daily conversations was noticeably absent when she was with her children. In early June, Eleanor suffered a mild stroke that left her speech slightly slurred and her left side weakened. The doctors recommended aggressive rehabilitation therapy, but Eleanor seemed to have lost much of her fight and motivation for recovery. She became more dependent on assistance with daily activities and spent longer periods sleeping or resting quietly. The stroke seemed to accelerate Eleanor's decline in subtle but noticeable ways. Her appetite decreased, her energy levels became more consistently low, and her interest in activities that had previously brought her joy began to wane. I increased my vigilance and care routine, ensuring that she received proper nutrition and medical attention while trying to maintain her comfort and dignity. Eleanor's children responded to news of the stroke with their typical patterns of behavior. James immediately called his mother's doctors to get detailed medical reports and prognosis information, approaching her condition like a business problem requiring data analysis. Patricia increased her visits slightly but seemed uncomfortable with Eleanor's increased frailty and communication difficulties. David's reaction was to ask more frequently about Eleanor's estate planning and financial arrangements. During her recovery period following the stroke, Eleanor began to speak more urgently about ensuring that her final wishes would be properly understood and executed. She asked me to help her organize important documents and to serve as a liaison with her attorney and financial advisors for routine matters. She seemed determined to complete any unfinished business while she still had the mental clarity and energy to do so. One evening in late June, Eleanor asked me to sit beside her bed and listen carefully to what she wanted to tell me. Her speech was labored, but her mind was clear as she explained that she had structured her estate in a way that would honor the values and principles that had guided her life. She said that she had made provisions for everyone who had been important to her, including arrangements that would ensure the continued support of her charitable commitments. Eleanor also told me that she had included provisions in her will that would allow me to pursue my dream of starting a healthcare consulting business. She wouldn't give me specific details but assured me that I would have the financial resources necessary to build something meaningful that would help other elderly people receive the care and support they deserved. Her generosity and thoughtfulness overwhelmed me with gratitude and emotion. Eleanor's condition remained relatively stable throughout the summer, though she continued to decline gradually in small increments that were noticeable to someone who spent every day with her. She slept more frequently, ate less enthusiastically, and seemed to be slowly withdrawing from the world around her. However, she maintained her dignity and grace throughout this difficult period, facing her mortality with a courage that I found inspiring. The household staff had grown accustomed to Eleanor's condition and my central role in her care. Margaret had softened her attitude toward me considerably, perhaps recognizing that I genuinely cared about Eleanor's well-being rather than pursuing any personal agenda. Mrs. Patterson began preparing special meals designed to tempt Eleanor's diminished appetite, and even the gardening staff would bring fresh flowers to brighten her room. Eleanor's children continued their pattern of sporadic visits throughout the summer, but their interactions with their mother became increasingly brief and uncomfortable. Eleanor's reduced energy and communication difficulties seemed to frustrate them, and they appeared relieved when their obligatory visits were completed. I felt sorry for all of them, recognizing that they were missing the opportunity to connect with their mother during her final months. In early September, Eleanor developed another respiratory infection that required antibiotic treatment and increased medical supervision. Her recovery was slower this time, and it became clear that her immune system was no longer able to fight off illnesses as effectively as before. The doctors recommended comfort care measures and suggested that Eleanor's life expectancy was probably measured in months rather than years. Eleanor seemed to understand and accept her prognosis with remarkable equanimity. She spent her remaining energy organizing her affairs and expressing gratitude to the people who had been important to her throughout her life. She wrote personal letters to longtime friends, family members, and employees, sharing memories and saying goodbye in her own way. During one of our quiet afternoons together in October, Eleanor asked me to promise that I would remember her fondly and that I would use whatever opportunities came my way to help other people who needed care and support. She said that the greatest legacy anyone could leave was the positive impact they had on other people's lives, and that she hoped her example would inspire me to continue making a difference in whatever way I could. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep on a quiet November morning. I was sitting beside her bed reading aloud from one of her favorite books when I noticed that her breathing had stopped. She looked serene and dignified even in death, and I felt privileged to have been with her during her final moments. The funeral arrangements were handled by James with typical efficiency and attention to detail. The service was held at the family's longtime church and was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Eleanor had touched through her charitable work and community involvement. The eulogies praised her generosity, intelligence, and dedication to helping others, painting a picture of a remarkable woman who had used her advantages to make the world a better place. Eleanor's children seemed genuinely grieved by their mother's death, though their sorrow was mixed with obvious concern about the practical implications of their loss. They had been expecting to inherit substantial wealth that would allow them to maintain their comfortable lifestyles indefinitely, and there was an undercurrent of anxiety about what Eleanor's will might contain. The will reading was scheduled for the following week at Mr. Richardson's law office. Eleanor's children, several grandchildren, longtime employees, and I were invited to attend. I felt uncomfortable being included in such a private family matter, but Mr. Richardson explained that Eleanor had specifically requested my presence and that I had been named in the will. The day of the will reading arrived with an atmosphere of tense anticipation. James, Patricia, and David arrived at the law office with their spouses and older children, clearly expecting to hear about the division of their substantial inheritance. The longtime household employees were also present, along with representatives from several of Eleanor's favorite charities. Mr. Richardson began by reading the standard legal language and then proceeded to Eleanor's specific bequests. She had left generous amounts to Margaret, Mrs. Patterson, and other longtime employees, ensuring their financial security in retirement. She had also made substantial donations to her favorite charities, continuing the philanthropic work that had been so important to her throughout her life. The family members listened politely to these preliminary bequests, but I could see their growing impatience as they waited to hear about the main inheritance. Eleanor's children clearly expected to divide the bulk of the estate among themselves, with perhaps small additional amounts for grandchildren and favorite causes. Then Mr. Richardson reached the section of the will that left everyone speechless. Eleanor had left each of her 3 children a trust fund worth $5 million, enough to maintain comfortable lifestyles but not enough to continue their current levels of extravagance indefinitely. The trusts included provisions requiring the recipients to engage in meaningful work or charitable activities, with distributions contingent on meeting specific criteria for social contribution. The grandchildren had been provided with education trusts that would cover college and graduate school expenses, along with modest inheritance amounts that would be available when they reached 30 years of age. Eleanor had also established a foundation to continue her charitable work, with professional management to ensure that her philanthropic legacy would continue. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. Eleanor had left the remainder of her estate, worth approximately $75 million, to me. The silence in the room was deafening as Mr. Richardson read Eleanor's explanation for this unprecedented decision. She wrote that I had provided her with 3 years of compassionate care, genuine friendship, and unwavering loyalty during the most difficult period of her life. She explained that her children had demonstrated through their actions that they viewed their inheritance as an entitlement rather than a responsibility, and that she had chosen to leave her wealth to someone who understood the importance of using privilege to help others. Eleanor's letter continued by explaining that she had researched my character thoroughly and was confident that I would use the inheritance wisely to pursue my dream of helping elderly people receive better care and support. She had also included specific suggestions for charitable giving and social impact projects that aligned with the values she had tried to live by throughout her life. The reactions in the room were explosive and immediate. James stood up and began shouting about undue influence and mental incompetency, demanding that the will be challenged in court. Patricia burst into tears and accused me of manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman for financial gain. David became belligerent and threatening, suggesting that I had somehow coerced or deceived his mother into changing her will. Mr. Richardson calmly explained that Eleanor had undergone extensive psychological evaluation to confirm her mental competency before signing the final version of her will. She had also made video recordings explaining her decisions and reasoning, which would be available if the will was challenged in court. The attorney assured everyone that Eleanor's wishes were legally sound and properly documented. I sat in stunned silence throughout the family's outrage, completely overwhelmed by Eleanor's generosity and the magnitude of responsibility she had placed on me. I had expected perhaps a small bequest in recognition of my service, but inheriting the bulk of her estate was beyond anything I could have imagined. The weight of her trust and expectations was both humbling and terrifying. The family members stormed out of the law office after threatening legal challenges and making accusations about my character and motives. I remained behind to speak with Mr. Richardson about the practical implications of Eleanor's bequest and the legal processes that would be required to settle the estate. Mr. Richardson explained that Eleanor had anticipated her family's reaction and had taken extensive precautions to ensure that her will would withstand any legal challenges. She had undergone multiple competency evaluations, had consulted with several attorneys, and had documented her reasoning thoroughly. The lawyer was confident that Eleanor's wishes would ultimately be honored, though the process might take several months or even years to complete. Over the following weeks, the Blackwood family launched a comprehensive legal challenge to Eleanor's will, hiring expensive attorneys and private investigators to find evidence of undue influence or mental incompetency. They questioned everyone who had interacted with Eleanor during her final years, looking for any indication that I had manipulated or coerced her into changing her will. The legal proceedings were emotionally draining and personally devastating. The family's attorneys portrayed me as a calculating opportunist who had taken advantage of a lonely, vulnerable elderly woman. They suggested that I had deliberately isolated Eleanor from her family and gradually gained control over her decision-making process. The accusations were painful and humiliating, even though I knew they were untrue. However, the evidence overwhelmingly supported Eleanor's mental competency and the validity of her decisions. Multiple doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers testified about Eleanor's alertness and cognitive abilities throughout the period when she was updating her will. Friends and acquaintances confirmed that Eleanor had spoken critically about her children's attitudes toward money and responsibility for years before I arrived. Most importantly, Eleanor's own video recordings provided compelling testimony about her reasoning and motivations. She spoke clearly and thoughtfully about her disappointment with her children's sense of entitlement and her desire to leave her wealth to someone who would use it responsibly. She acknowledged that her decision would be controversial but explained that she felt obligated to act according to her values rather than social expectations. The legal battle lasted 8 months before the court ruled decisively in favor of upholding Eleanor's will. The judge found no evidence of undue influence or mental incompetency and praised Eleanor's thorough documentation of her reasoning and decision-making process. The Blackwood family's appeals were unsuccessful, and they were eventually forced to accept the validity of their mother's final wishes. Inheriting Eleanor's fortune was simultaneously the most wonderful and terrifying experience of my life. The financial security was life-changing, allowing me to pay off my student loans, ensure my mother's medical care, and pursue my dreams without the constant stress of financial worry. However, the responsibility of managing such wealth ethically and effectively was overwhelming. I decided to honor Eleanor's trust by using the inheritance to create the healthcare consulting business I had always dreamed of, but on a much larger scale than I had ever imagined possible. I established a non-profit organization dedicated to helping elderly people navigate complex medical and social service systems, providing the kind of personalized care and advocacy that Eleanor had valued so highly. The organization grew rapidly as word spread about our services and approach. We hired nurses, social workers, and care coordinators who shared Eleanor's values of compassion, dignity, and respect for elderly clients. We also established partnerships with hospitals, assisted living facilities, and community organizations to expand our reach and impact. Within 3 years, our organization was serving thousands of elderly people across multiple states, providing services ranging from care coordination and medical advocacy to companionship and emotional support. We also established a training program for professional caretakers, emphasizing the importance of treating elderly clients as whole people deserving of respect and dignity rather than just medical cases to be managed. The Blackwood family eventually came to accept the reality of Eleanor's decision, though our relationships remained strained and distant. James continued to run the family business successfully, though on a smaller scale than he had originally planned. Patricia remained active in charitable work, though she had to adjust her lifestyle somewhat to accommodate her reduced inheritance. David struggled initially with the limitations of his trust fund but eventually found meaningful work with a non-profit organization serving homeless veterans. Eleanor's grandchildren, who had been largely shielded from the family conflicts, gradually began to reach out to me as they matured and learned more about their grandmother's values and motivations. Several of them expressed interest in the healthcare organization I had established and asked about volunteer opportunities that would allow them to contribute to Eleanor's legacy. Looking back on the extraordinary journey that began with a simple caretaker position, I am constantly amazed by Eleanor's wisdom and generosity. She saw potential in me that I hadn't recognized in myself and provided me with opportunities to make a difference that I never could have achieved on my own. Her legacy lives on through the thousands of elderly people who receive better care and support because of the foundation she made possible. The most important lesson Eleanor taught me was that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the positive impact we have on other people's lives. She showed me that privilege comes with responsibility, and that those who have been blessed with advantages have an obligation to use those advantages to help others who are less fortunate. The transformation in my life from struggling caretaker to philanthropic leader was surreal and overwhelming at times. I went from worrying about paying my student loans to managing a $7 to $5 million inheritance and the enormous responsibility that came with it. There were days when I felt completely unprepared for the magnitude of what Eleanor had entrusted to me, but her example and her written guidance provided the foundation I needed to move forward. One of my first major decisions was to establish the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation for Compassionate Care, dedicating the majority of the inheritance to ensuring that elderly people across the country would have access to the kind of personalized, dignified care that Eleanor had valued so highly. The foundation's mission was to bridge the gap between institutional healthcare and family support, providing services for people who needed more than medical treatment but didn't have access to comprehensive private care. The Foundation's programs expanded rapidly as we identified communities with significant elderly populations that were underserved by existing healthcare and social service systems. We established care coordination centers in rural areas where elderly residents often struggled to navigate complex medical bureaucracies without assistance. We also created companion programs that matched trained volunteers with isolated elderly people who needed regular social contact and emotional support. One of our most successful initiatives was the development of a comprehensive training program for professional caretakers that emphasized the emotional and psychological aspects of elder care alongside medical and practical skills. We recruited people with natural compassion and empathy, teaching them to see their clients as whole human beings with rich histories, valuable wisdom, and continuing potential for growth and contribution. The program attracted caretakers from diverse backgrounds who were motivated by genuine desire to help others rather than just economic necessity. Many of our graduates went on to start their own small care businesses or to work with assisted living facilities that shared our philosophy of treating elderly residents with dignity and respect. The ripple effect of Eleanor's investment in compassionate care extended far beyond what either of us could have originally imagined. My personal adjustment to sudden wealth was complicated and required significant psychological adaptation. I had grown up in a working-class family where financial security was always uncertain, and suddenly having access to unlimited resources felt almost overwhelming. I worked with financial advisors and therapists to develop healthy relationships with money and to create systems that would ensure the inheritance was used responsibly. One of the most challenging aspects of my new situation was dealing with the dramatic change in how people treated me once news of the inheritance became public. Former acquaintances who had barely acknowledged my existence suddenly wanted to renew old friendships. Distant relatives appeared with investment opportunities and requests for financial assistance. Business people and non-profit organizations constantly approached me with proposals for partnerships and donations. Learning to distinguish between genuine relationships and opportunistic interest became a crucial skill that I had to develop quickly. I found myself relying heavily on the small circle of people who had known and cared about me before the inheritance, including my mother, a few close friends from nursing school, and some of the household staff from the Blackwood estate who had witnessed my relationship with Eleanor firsthand. The legal resolution of Eleanor's will had broader implications beyond my personal situation. The case became something of a landmark in estate law, establishing important precedents about the rights of elderly people to make unconventional bequests based on their values and personal relationships rather than traditional family obligations. Legal scholars wrote articles about Eleanor's case, praising her thorough documentation and the court's recognition of her autonomy and decision-making capacity. The Blackwood family's public reaction to the will reading and subsequent legal challenge had been widely covered in local media, creating a narrative about family greed and entitlement that damaged their reputation in social and business circles. This unintended consequence of their legal challenge may have been more costly to them in the long run than accepting Eleanor's decision would have been. Over time, however, some members of the family began to reach out to me with more mature perspectives on what had happened. Eleanor's eldest grandchild, James's daughter Catherine, contacted me 2 years after the will reading to express her admiration for the work I was doing with the foundation. She explained that she had come to understand her grandmother's values better as she matured and was proud that Eleanor's legacy was being used to help other people. Catherine asked if she could volunteer with the foundation during her summer breaks from college, wanting to learn more about elder care and to contribute to her grandmother's mission. Her genuine interest and respectful attitude helped begin the process of healing some of the family wounds that had been created by the inheritance controversy. She became one of our most dedicated volunteers and eventually joined the foundation's board of directors after completing her education. The success of the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation attracted attention from other wealthy families who were interested in similar approaches to philanthropic giving. I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences about innovative charitable strategies and the importance of values-based estate planning. These speaking opportunities allowed me to share Eleanor's story and to encourage other people to think carefully about how they wanted their wealth to be used after their deaths. The foundation's work also attracted interest from academic researchers who were studying effective approaches to elder care and aging in place. We partnered with several universities to conduct research on the impact of personalized care coordination and companionship services on elderly people's health outcomes and quality of life. The results consistently showed that relatively modest investments in compassionate care could dramatically improve elderly people's physical and mental health while allowing them to maintain independence longer. My mother's health had improved significantly once I was able to ensure that she received comprehensive medical care and support services. The stress of financial worry had been affecting her own well-being, and the security that came with the inheritance allowed her to focus on her health and relationships rather than constantly worrying about medical bills and living expenses. She became one of the foundation's strongest supporters and frequently volunteered to help with administrative tasks and client outreach. The original Blackwood estate was eventually sold, with proceeds donated to the foundation to support our expanding programs. Walking through those elegant rooms one final time before the sale was emotionally difficult, filled with memories of my 3 years caring for Eleanor and the profound relationship we had developed. However, I knew that Eleanor would have approved of converting her former home into resources that could help thousands of other elderly people receive better care. The estate sale also provided closure on that chapter of my life and allowed me to focus fully on building the foundation and expanding our services. We established our headquarters in a more modest but functional building that reflected our values of using resources efficiently while providing comfortable spaces for clients, staff, and volunteers to interact. One of the most rewarding aspects of running the foundation has been witnessing the impact of our services on individual clients and their families. We regularly receive letters and phone calls from family members expressing gratitude for the care and support their elderly relatives have received through our programs. Many clients have told us that our services have allowed them to remain in their own homes longer and maintain independence that would otherwise have been impossible. The companion program has been particularly successful, creating meaningful relationships between volunteers and elderly clients that benefit both parties. Many of our volunteers are retirees themselves who have found new purpose and meaning through their service to others. The intergenerational connections that develop through these relationships often become lasting friendships that enrich everyone involved. Our training programs for professional caretakers have also generated significant positive feedback from the healthcare industry. Hospitals and assisted living facilities that employ our graduates consistently report higher patient satisfaction scores and better health outcomes. The emphasis on treating elderly clients with dignity and respect has proven to be not just ethically important but also practically effective in achieving positive results. As the foundation has grown and matured, I have been able to step back somewhat from day-to-day operations and focus more on strategic planning and relationship building with other organizations that share our mission. This evolution has allowed me to pursue some of the traveling and continuing education that Eleanor and I used to discuss during our afternoon conversations. I have visited eldercare facilities and programs in several other countries, learning about different cultural approaches to aging and family responsibility. These experiences have enriched my understanding of the challenges facing elderly people globally and have provided ideas for new programs and services that we might develop. Eleanor would have loved hearing about these travels and discussing the different approaches to elder care that I observed. The Foundation's success has also created opportunities for me to advocate for policy changes that would improve the lives of elderly people more broadly. I have testified before legislative committees about the need for better funding of home care services and have worked with advocacy organizations to promote legislation supporting aging-in-place initiatives. These advocacy efforts reflect Eleanor's belief that individual charitable giving, while important, must be combined with systemic changes to create lasting improvements in how society treats its elderly members. She understood that personal generosity could help specific individuals but that broader social change required engagement with political and policy processes. Looking back on the journey from that nervous young woman who knocked on the Blackwood Estate's front door to becoming the leader of a major philanthropic foundation, I am constantly amazed by the power of human connection and compassion to create positive change. Eleanor saw something in me that I didn't recognize in myself and provided me with opportunities that I never could have imagined. The most important lesson from this experience is that wealth and privilege are tools that can be used either to perpetuate inequality or to create positive change, depending on the values and choices of the people who control them. Eleanor chose to use her advantages to empower someone who would continue her mission of helping others, creating a legacy that extends far beyond her own lifetime. The Blackwood family's initial reaction to Eleanor's will reflected a common assumption that inheritance should follow traditional family lines regardless of the recipient's character or values. Eleanor's decision challenged that assumption and demonstrated that elderly people have the right to make decisions based on their own assessment of who will best honor their values and continue their work. The legal victory that upheld Eleanor's will has encouraged other elderly people to consider unconventional approaches to estate planning that reflect their personal values rather than social expectations. Several attorneys have contacted me to discuss similar cases where elderly clients want to leave significant bequests to caretakers, charitable organizations, or other non-family members who have demonstrated genuine care and commitment. Today, 5 years after Eleanor's death, the foundation she made possible is serving over 10,000 elderly clients across 12 states. We employ more than 500 people in various capacities, from direct care providers to administrative staff to program coordinators. The economic impact of Eleanor's decision extends far beyond the direct services we provide to include job creation and community development in the areas where we operate. The foundation's annual budget now exceeds $20 million, with funding coming from a combination of Eleanor's original bequest, investment returns, and donations from other supporters who have been inspired by our mission and results. This financial sustainability ensures that Eleanor's legacy will continue indefinitely, helping elderly people receive compassionate care for generations to come. My personal life has also been transformed by Eleanor's gift in ways that extend beyond the professional opportunities it created. The financial security has allowed me to focus on meaningful work rather than just economic survival, and the confidence that comes from successfully managing such significant responsibility has opened doors to relationships and experiences that I never could have accessed before. I have been able to provide my mother with the kind of care and support that Eleanor valued so highly, ensuring that she can age with dignity and independence in her own home. I have also been able to help other family members and friends pursue their own educational and career goals without the financial constraints that once seemed insurmountable. The Foundation's work has introduced me to remarkable people from all walks of life who share Eleanor's commitment to compassionate service. Board members, volunteers, staff, and clients have all contributed to my continued education about the complexities of aging, healthcare, and social responsibility. These relationships have enriched my life immeasurably and have provided ongoing inspiration for the Foundation's work. One of the most meaningful developments has been the gradual reconciliation with some members of the Blackwood family who have come to understand and appreciate Eleanor's decision. Catherine, Eleanor's granddaughter, now serves on the Foundation's board and has become a close friend and valuable advisor. Her perspective as someone who knew Eleanor from childhood provides important insights into Eleanor's values and motivations. Catherine's younger brother Michael has also become involved with the Foundation, contributing his business expertise to help with strategic planning and operational efficiency. Their participation has helped heal some of the family wounds created by the inheritance controversy and has created a bridge between Eleanor's original family and the new family she created through her legacy. The foundation's success has attracted media attention that has helped raise awareness about the challenges facing elderly people and the importance of compassionate care. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, and authors have told Eleanor's story and the foundation's work, reaching audiences that might not otherwise have considered these issues important or urgent. This media coverage has also helped challenge stereotypes about caretakers and domestic workers, highlighting the skill, dedication, and professionalism required for quality elder care. Many of our staff members have been featured in articles and interviews that showcase their expertise and commitment, helping to elevate the status and recognition of this essential but often undervalued work. Eleanor's story has become an inspiration for other elderly people who feel disconnected from family members who seem more interested in inheritance than relationship. Several clients have told me that learning about Eleanor's decision gave them courage to prioritize their own values and relationships over family expectations in their own estate planning. The foundation has also inspired other caretakers and healthcare workers to pursue their own dreams and goals, demonstrating that dedication and compassion can lead to unexpected opportunities. We regularly receive applications from people who have been motivated by Eleanor's story to seek careers in elder care or to start their own businesses serving elderly clients. As I reflect on this extraordinary journey, I am constantly reminded of Eleanor's wisdom in understanding that the most valuable inheritances are not financial but moral and philosophical. She left me not just money but also a mission, not just wealth but also wisdom, not just resources but also responsibility. The young woman who walked into the Blackwood estate looking for a job found much more than employment. She found a mentor, a friend, and ultimately a calling that has given her life profound meaning and purpose. Eleanor's legacy lives on through every elderly person who receives compassionate care, every caretaker who is trained in our programs, and every family that is kept together by the support services we provide. The most beautiful aspect of this story is that it continues to unfold every day through the work of the foundation and the lives of the people we serve. Eleanor's decision to trust an unknown caretaker with her life's work has created ripple effects that will continue for generations, touching lives in ways that neither of us could have fully imagined when we first met in that sun-filled morning room overlooking her gardens. Today, when I visit elderly clients in their homes or meet with families who are struggling to provide care for aging relatives, I carry Eleanor's example with me as a reminder that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and compassion regardless of their age or circumstances. Her legacy is not just the foundation that bears her name but the principles that guide our work and the relationships that make it meaningful. The underdog caretaker who inherited everything has learned that true inheritance is not about receiving wealth but about accepting responsibility, not about gaining privilege but about using privilege to serve others, and not about changing your circumstances but about staying true to your values regardless of your circumstances. Eleanor Blackwood's greatest gift was not the money she left me but the trust she placed in me and the example she set for how wealth should be used. Her legacy reminds us all that every life has value, every person deserves care, and every act of compassion has the potential to create positive change that extends far beyond what we can see or imagine. The shocked billionaire family eventually learned the same lesson that Eleanor had tried to teach them throughout their lives: that true wealth comes from the relationships we build, the service we provide, and the love we share with others. Money is simply a tool that can be used for good or ill, but character and compassion are the real measures of a life well lived.